Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third presentation of the day. We have had a really great morning so far with Michelle Lou Reid from AGL and Fabio Oliveira from WorkSafe Victoria, who have both been sharing some really fascinating insights, and I'm really sure you guys are also taking away some great things from this. Great. I'd like to thank our event sponsors, Nintex, for sponsoring the event because without them, these types of things we wouldn't be able to do even when they are digital. So thank you to those guys for supporting the event. Our third speaker for the morning is John Makhoul, and he'll be talking about all things utilising customer data to accelerate business transformation benefits delivery in media. John is currently at Endeavour Energy. However, he has a really extensive background in the media industry, working at Fairfax and also News Corp, and he'll be talking to some of those points today. So, John, I will hand the floor over to you, and you may start your presentation.
Great. Good morning, everybody. So yes, my name's John Makhoul. A little about my background, only because it might inform what you might see, the orientation I take to talking about this topic. Engineering background, MBA. Most of my career was spent in industrial organizations, spent a long stretch of my career as a quality manager. And then, of course, did the Lean Six Sigma thing and the change management leadership thing, program leadership. And so that kind of engineering quality background tends to drive the way I think about some of these aspects. Today I want to talk about media, only because it's got some great examples and lots of transactional data, and it tends to be an organization, an industry sector that doesn't spend a lot of time thinking of what it does in operational terms. There are operations teams, but they don't have the same operations type focus as I guess industrial type product-led organizations, tangible product-led organizations. So let me kick off and set it up a little bit. So just some motherhood statements, perhaps. We have a tendency to look at the market through the lens of our business, right? We tend to think about business first, and then we try to anticipate what customer needs are from that, and then we choose initiatives and improvement priorities based on either defined strategy. They tend to be cost focused or complexity focused or product led, and we often do reach out and try to come up with metrics, but those metrics tend to be, shall I say, consultant-led. They tend to be metrics that are sold in. So our focus is on the shiny new metrics that we're not currently measuring, and we tend to ignore the wealth of data and information that's already residing within our organizations. The last statement around it's only the customer or market that can determine success of a product or service offering. I don't think anybody would dispute that, and yet we don't check in on our customers or the market to see how our product or service is performing. So the focus here today is on using data to help us prioritize the most impactful initiatives to lead our transformation efforts. And one dimension that I use to break this down is to look at data in terms of new customer research type data. So if your organizations have customer experience teams, they'll typically be looking at bringing insights into the organization that haven't already been there, and perhaps using novel ways to express what customer needs are from new data sources, typically survey based or post interaction feedback based, and that's often a great way to drive what your improvement agenda looks like. My advocacy today is more for the existing customer failure data that is already in your organization that you're probably underutilizing, but has a whole depth and richness about it, which with a little bit of effort, and maybe that's what attracts me to it mostly. It is such low effort typically to access this existing data, aggregate it, make some sense of it, and use it to drive your initiatives. That's probably why I find it so appealing. So I'll be focusing more on this left-hand side. What customer failure data do we have that we can aggregate, distill to glean sufficient insights to prioritize our improvement efforts, to deliver benefits for the customers and the market, as well as our organization. Of course, both of them are important. And I'm talking about reactive here because typically something's gone wrong, and therefore we've had interaction, and we capture that reactive data. The proactive data tends to be a lot more expensive, and so back to that initial point I made. So here's a bit of a mind map of how I often see my role in organizations in addressing this. And there might be other organizational teams typically that think about things in this way, or look at different aspects, one of these three aspects. So starting on the left, something goes wrong for the customer. A product isn't delivered, an application doesn't work. Either way, they need some help and they contact us. And we do service recovery. That is probably by far the most important of these three dimensions. Somebody or some team needs to be responsible for understanding, managing, planning, resourcing the way we do service recovery. Do what we need to do to correct and satisfy the immediate customer issue. Priority number one. My typical focus, though, tends to be in these other two areas. So while we're doing our service recovery, we're often using some sort of task tracking application to record what we've done or the issue. And that failure information, that's the goal that I think we typically underutilize. And so how do we document the failure sufficiently to allow some sort of management oversight? And then how do we use that data to prioritize and initiate improvement? All right. And my sense is that we probably don't. My experience has told me that we often will do this reasonably well because things go wrong for the customer. We will have a tracking system where we'll capture that information, but we often won't make that bridge across to, well, how do we use that information in a certain way in certain areas to then drive our improvement agenda? A bit more detail on each. The key elements that are required in each of those areas, and they're very important, right? Especially service recovery. The processes, systems, training, the cultural aspects that we need to ingrain within our service teams to ensure we have a fast, pleasant, effective resolution. And then the capturing of failure information, working across the various complaint, feedback, capture, and workflow systems that are probably already in place across multiple channels. And then my advocacy is for consolidating, simplifying, and unifying those channels over time so the data is as good as it can be. And then using it to actually prioritize and improve and initiate action. And this link from service recovery to capturing the data effectively to then using that data to drive improvement is often broken, and it's often incomplete, largely because you don't typically get one group or one team that has complete oversight of this area. Right, and if it is done, it's done in pockets and parts are missing. This is a diagram that I probably first drafted when I was at Brambles, and we looked across all of the sources of customer failure data information that existed, and I led the process excellence team there, and so therefore, it was largely my job to drive the improvement agenda across Asia Pac, and so while I recognize that some teams were taking some action in some of these areas, we weren't taking a holistic, distilled view of all of these sources of input to help us drive our improvement agenda. And we're doing some fancy things around aligning stuff to strategy, but a lot of this data, which was being captured, sometimes effectively, sometimes ineffectively, weren't really being optimized in terms of the level of insight it gave us to whether we're working on the right things to have that customer impact. But this is certainly a good way to think about it, right? What are all these data sources? How can I somehow make sense of them so that we don't put unnecessary weight on a less important, perhaps, failure mode? how do we look across them all and maybe step back and somehow squint, if that's probably the right way of expressing it, and coming up with something that makes sense. I'm going to show a number of examples now, just to give you a sense of the approach taken. I think that might be the best way to convey this message. This is an example from Fairfax, and I think it's from their domain business unit. And so credits, and I'll talk about credits quite a bit, because credits are a classic data set, which is probably which is typically captured by the sales team if there's an upstream credits initiation system. So, for example, at Domain, credits were initiated in Salesforce by an account manager, and then they would flow through a fairly laborious process, and they'd end up with a financial credit raised in a financial system, and which was approved by the finance team with some sort of loop back to the sales guys. So knowing where your data is initiated and capturing that whole end-to-end process, I'll talk about later. But credits in particular are a very useful source, because we're making adjustments to somebody's account. So in a business to consumer organization, refunds might be the dominant thing to look at here. But in business to business, where you have accounts being established, credits are a great place to look. And this is a simple Pareto chart. A Pareto chart is an ordered bar chart. So every time a credit is initiated in Salesforce, a reason code is allocated, and then a whole bunch of other commentary is added in a descriptive field. At the end of a certain period, you can run a report. Now, this report wasn't run. There was a flat file report with numerical data, which was probably reported somewhere, but I really couldn't see anybody who was taking any kind of action. Somehow we were capturing that data so that the approver could see that it was a reasonable credit to be raised. But who was stepping back every month, every quarter, every 6 months, perhaps, depending on how many credits are raised, and looking at what are the primary drivers, what are the main reason codes, and then dissecting them. So goodwill, billed after cancellation, bulk uploader issues, duplicate billings, incorrect settings, contract error. There are some classic reason codes there, which may not all be actionable, but you'd certainly want to look at them in a priority way from left to right. Domain had a data team which was looking for use cases to leverage their Tableau capability, and so getting those guys to access Salesforce data and finance data and making sense of it in Tableau was quite easy once they were given some direction. Here's a different example. So I'll be showing various examples from various places to make my point. So this is another example from Fairfax Media, which talks to the various sources of customer failure demand. Okay, so the word demand there is quite important. So what are the things that we do within our organization that are driven by customer failure? Okay, and so that demand that's placed on our teams, we often don't distinguish between value demand and failure demand. So value demand is typically what our organization's been set up for. We expect customers to contact us to place orders, but even though we expect customers to also call us if their newspaper wasn't delivered, we don't differentiate between the value demand and the failure demand. And so I'm a strong advocate for customer failure demand knowledge, right? Figure out what things go wrong for your customer, and then how we know about it, and what kind of data imprint is left. And this was just a great way of representing the customer failure demand across the various key business parts of our business, right? When we produce something, we publish something, and often there was litigation, or there was a lot of effort taken at the very least in ensuring there wasn't something litigious that was included in the story. Advertising was our main revenue driver, and so lots of billing, invoicing type things had to be dealt with there. We ran lots of events, and we had subscription models for our publications as well. Again, just another example of ways you can figure out So here's one example from Brambles where you can see the various sources of customer failure data, which was driving demand and leaving an imprint. And here's another one for Fairfax Media. Here's another one from another media company. This is News Corp. Print credit adjustments. So we start off by looking at the overall rate of credit adjustments per month, just to get a sense of how big is this thing. Looking for clues in terms of, are there spikes at every quarter? That's when credits typically are raised. And then doing a similar thing to what I'd shown you a couple of slides back with Fairfax Domain, where we look at what are the main reason drivers. Again, credits reports existed. Credits data and reason codes were attributed to particular credits. Lots of descriptive information was captured to justify the credit being appraised and approved. But there was no systematic step back. Let's look at it across a period. I'm not sure if this was 6 months or a year. In fact, there's some data there which shows what it was. And then looking at, are there any reason codes here which are actionable? Okay, so obviously from this, perhaps not so obviously, but simply looking at this Pareto chart won't allow you to then simply fix this bar. And so the next step is to break it down. And so I took that graphical Pareto chart presented here on the right, take it to the next slide, put it in the top left, and then let's go through them one by one. Okay, what's an agreement condition? Who's the best person who might lead it? What are the systems that are used? What do we know about it? How is it varied over time? Are there particular patterns in the spike? And again, this is just breaking the big problem down into subcomponents where there might be additional information, and we can actually do something about it or find some root causes first before we can do something about it. And here's where you need to leverage all your data analysis skills or your root cause analysis skills, and to a degree, some tenacity to actually make some progress. And again, I'll put a couple more slides in to show the example in a bit more richness. The next highest bar was around transfers. What is it? When does it happen? Who might be the best person to lead it? What do we know about it? How has it been trending over time? You can see it's a bit of a downward trend, but don't be fooled by that when you look at time series data, because often credits that are raised this month don't show up in the data until the following month. So there could be a bit of a dip due to the way the data is captured. So you need to be aware of that. The third highest bar was sales pricing error. Pardon me. This seems like something which is more actionable, right? There's still 3,000 credits there. We have a sense of what the definition is. Still haven't determined who's best to lead. This has a potential to yield tangible cash benefits depending on the root causes we find. Obviously there was one special cause that we found back here. So you can now go into a bit more detail to understand and unpack those reasons. Okay, that was an example from News Corp. Here's another example going back to Brambles and CHEP. And these were credits that were extracted from SAP. Again, you see a bar chart. Those of you who are familiar with Minitab will know this is the way Minitab Pareto charts look. And again, same sort of idea. How many credits do we have? Let's put them in a prioritized order so we can focus on the ones that might have the biggest impact. Okay, in this example, transport, service center handling fee, issue fee, things that we've had to adjust a customer's account for or ultimately refund for. And then when you break that down, again, that overall chart over here, you take transport credits, you break it down to a bit more detail. In this case, we've broken it down by who the customer is, and it seems that we had a particular issue with either the contract or the transport fee agreement with a particular customer. Okay, and this was a fair while back, and so I think Brambles would be fine with me not disguising that data. Okay, do we getting a general sense of the approach? One more example: incorrect hire rate by customer. Now this data is here. That's, I think, the key point for me. I think I just want to reemphasize that some organizations will have a proactive finance team that will recognize that there's nobody else in the organization that is looking at credit reason codes or Salesforce reason codes or accounts receivable, non-payment reason codes. And they may have somebody who's there to systematically attend to it, but often they won't. And, you might be lucky enough, again, to have a quality leader who recognizes that there's this gold standard failure data which can produce some really quick analytics and some really quick benefits, hopefully, if you can execute and find root causes. The key, though, is to find a way to either get access to the data you have permission for, right, because it might be your data, or at least ask the question, well, if nobody owns this data, then who else is going to extract it? And my suggestion is it ought to be you. So I'm not sure who's on this call, but no matter what your role is, frankly, nobody else is going to be proactive if this is not currently being reviewed without some sort of nudge. Okay. One more aspect is, while you're reviewing these failure modes, look, and my main advocacy is in reviewing credits data or refunds data, for example, is primarily because I think the failure data is valuable, and therefore that's the main reason I think you should look at credits, so you can get the failure data and then use that to identify and prioritize your improvement efforts. But often the data isn't that great, and so you need to look into the way credits are raised and where reason codes are applied. You might have to adjust those reason codes. But every time I've looked at a credits process or a refunds process, I typically find it's a big, convoluted, complex process with lots of controls. Okay, and I'm not sure if you can see me, but I'll do the air quotes controls thing. So if we're going to return money to a customer, if we're going to return money to a business customer in the form of a credit, then typically there are a lot of approvals. And a lot of approvals means a lot of workflows and a lot of manual trackers, and sometimes it's a nice, neat tasking system that manages all that. But often it's manual, and often there's an email, and often there's a justification, and often there's a review and an audit, and people want to be sure that we're doing the right thing before money goes back. Understandable, but you generally end up with these horribly long and complex processes, right? The customer either identifies the issue or we identify the issue. Depending on how it's received, either the sales guys will lead the investigation or finance lead the investigation, but in this case, it was captured in Salesforce. Somehow or other, we have to propose a resolution, and that has to be approved. And so many parties typically get involved. There's probably a hierarchy of where the approvals reside based on value. And then once there is agreement that, yes, we need to return some money to a customer's account, or we need to refund some money to a customer, then somebody has to actually process that. We have to action the credit, and that's typically a finance-led activity or a finance team. But certainly the sales teams get involved in justification and rationalization. And then we have to close the issue. And closing the issue means there are some adjustments to be made. And sometimes, in some areas I've worked, there's a sales commission to be backed out because, hey, you made a mistake, Mr. Salesperson, and therefore it's flowed through into a bill that shouldn't have been raised, and therefore it's flowed back to a refund or a credit. So this again, this is typically a end-to-end process which may or may not belong to finance, but is probably suboptimal. And this is probably where most of the benefits of reducing customer failure demand comes from. And in this example, again, this was from news, and it was a while ago now, so I'm sure they wouldn't mind me sharing some of this stuff. But when we mapped this end-to-end credit adjustment process, there were at least 5 participants, 5 different process participants who were involved in the raising of a credit and a credit adjustment for print, and even more so for digital, right? Typically digital processes which are newer tend to be less mature, and therefore, because it's digital, we think, oh, it's easy for somebody to check a box. but that often adds to lead time. So I'm always interested in how many people are actually involved in a process, how many people are touching a credit adjustment, and then how many handoffs are there, right? So the salesperson, customer identifies it, passes on to a salesperson refers it to their sales administrator raises a Salesforce credit flows to a sales leader who reviews the credit, makes an improvement adjustment, approves or rejects. It flows into a finance system, and an accountant somewhere reviews it, right? And then it flows through for other approvals based on value. So, I'm not surprised when I see 6, 7, 8, 9 handoffs in any process, frankly, but in a credit adjustment process in particular, where there's a customer perhaps who's waiting for that adjustment, right? It's pretty important because it all adds to lead time. Again, how many systems are used gives you a sense of the complexity. And in this case, we made an effort estimate, right? How much time does it actually take the different process participants to do their bit? And it's not normally this high, but it turned out to be this high because there was some weird stuff happening in the accounts receivable team. But the self-reported effort involved in credit adjustments was 3.5 hours. And this is where most of your benefits will come from. Often we will bill somebody and it will be our mistake, and therefore the billing needs to be reversed. And therefore we're reversing a charge that shouldn't have been made. In other occasions, it may be that, that something operational happened in it. So in digital environments, it's typically the effort involved in correcting. In physical product environments, there's many, many other costs: warranty, rework, sending somebody out to do some field service work. But yeah, understanding what is involved effort-wise in resolving a customer issue is the point here. And that's where your benefits will flow from any reduction you can make through doing root cause analysis on your customer failure data. Not sure how I'm doing for time, but let me just wrap it up. So the key message here is identify and select a customer failure data set. You may only have one, and if you're looking for one to start with, pick finance credits. It's easy, it's there. We need to, for financial control, have some sort of reason code and record and justification. So finance credits are a great place to start, but don't stay there. If you have broader responsibilities, if you're a transformation leader or a quality leader or a process excellence leader or a strategy PMO type leader, and you're looking for things to set up for your business to drive improvement, then look at sales call feedback. Look at where we apply our discounts. Look at unusually named phrases like make goods, right? Many organizations have an activity called make good, which precedes or is in lieu of a refund or a credit. Look at accounts receivable feedback, right? I've been thinking about, when I think about all of the people involved when something goes wrong for the customer, you can easily call them these hidden, sometimes not so hidden, but these transactional factories. And these are the teams that get involved in fixing things. And if you can reduce the incidence of failure by getting to root cause, you're going to make so many lives better downstream. Tech support calls, complaints, often, you'll be in an organization where you're legally obligated to manage formal complaints in a formal way. Now, most organizations will have a good, tight mechanism for dealing with complaints. And if you're ISO certified, you'll typically have a complaints register, and you'll have some kind of management review once a year at least, where you're looking at root causes. But what about all these others? What about all these other almost routine customer failure type activities that we pursue? So identify a customer failure data set, pick one, pick several, depending on what your role is. And then spend some time thinking about what is all the effort that goes on when something goes wrong for the customer. What happens in service recovery teams, customer service teams? Try to get those customer service teams to talk about value demand versus failure demand, right? Because many customer service teams exist to do good, positive stuff like call a customer after a sale, to gauge their satisfaction and to ask if there's anything else we can upsell them on. So some customer service teams, many customer service teams do proactive, positive things, but a lot of customer service teams spend a lot of their time taking complaints, requests for items that weren't shipped to be shipped, asking for a credit, asking for a refund, complaining about something which was defected and wanting some sort of rectification. And those sort of warranty teams get involved in it. So really get in there and understand what those service recovery and customer service teams are doing, and think about accounts receivable. You know, how many of our accounts receivable issues are due to disputes? And that's another source, right? So accounts receivable disputes versus credit versus customer complaint versus Salesforce feedback. It's another source of data. If we could improve our delivery, how much easier will make our accounts receivables team's life, because they're only pursuing those who are perhaps using us more of as a cash flow management provider. And then use your estimate of your costs and effort from up here to really derive your benefits. So if I'm getting 2,000 credits a year, and if reducing them by 10%, 20%, 50% gives me 2 hours per credit, you now get a sense of where the value might be. Okay, and that's kind of a minimum sort of benefit, I would imagine. If you're working in a physical, more tangible product space, the benefits for improving quality and delivery performance will be much higher than that. And then, of course, use that to prioritize improvement efforts, right? How are your improvement efforts currently prioritized? This may not be the only input, but if you don't have another mechanism for prioritizing, I'd argue this is a great way to start. It's directly impacting the customer, and it's going to directly have an impact on the amount of effort that's consumed within your organization in dealing with it. And I think that was all I had to say.
Fantastic. Thanks, John. Thanks so much for that really fantastic presentation and sharing those insights with everyone. I'm sure it's been very valuable for a lot of our attendees to hear your experiences, your insights, what you've kind of worked on in your career as well, and what you've gathered throughout the time. So thank you so much for sharing those with everybody. I'm sure it was very invaluable.
My pleasure.
So unfortunately, we don't have enough time for questions this morning, but what I would recommend everyone do, if you do want to ask John anything or talk to him about anything, I'm sure John would not be opposed to you reaching out to him, whether it be via LinkedIn or whatnot, and I'm sure he'd be happy to talk with you further about it post-event. So John, I'm assuming that's okay with you, but but yeah, absolutely. I recommend everyone reach out to John if you do have anything you want to talk about with him, and you can do so post-event. So with that being said, thanks again, John, for joining us this morning. It was great.
Thank you all.
Thank you. So everyone, what we're going to do is we've got a session break now for you to quickly go to the bathroom, get a drink, get a coffee, do what you need to do this morning for the next 20 minutes, and then we'll be back at 11:40 for a presentation by Conrad Kempe from Sydney Water. And so please join us back in 17 minutes time, and we'll see you then. So yeah, as I said, get a drink, get a coffee, go to the bathroom, do what you need to do, and then we'll see you back at 11:40 on the dot for the next presentation.